A teenage boy stands frozen in the narrow airplane aisle, hands raised as three air marshals surround him with weapons drawn. Passengers record with phones. The lead flight attendant smirks until the cabin door reopens. A woman in a tailored suit flashes a badge that makes everyone's face drain of color. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. What would you do if you saw someone being falsely accused? Let's explore how one mother turned an airline's worst nightmare into a powerful lesson about prejudice. 17-year-old Jamal Washington stood in front of his bedroom mirror, meticulously adjusting his tie. This wasn't just any day. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and unwavering determination. The prestigious National Youth Science Competition in Boston awaited him, and his revolutionary aerodynamics project had earned him one of only 20 finalist spots nationwide. "You got this," he whispered to himself, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. It wasn't just the competition making him nervous. This would be his first time flying alone. Down the hall, his mother Vivian Washington was preparing for her own important day. As the recently appointed deputy director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, she had a morning of high-level meetings ahead. Few people in their suburban Atlanta neighborhood knew about Vivian's powerful position. She preferred to keep her work life separate from their home life, a boundary that had served them well since Jamal's father had passed away when Jamal was just 7 years old. "Got your boarding pass printed?" Vivian asked, appearing in Jamal's doorway. Her tailored pantsuit and minimal jewelry reflected her practical, no-nonsense approach to life. "Yes, Mom, and my ID and my project files backed up in 3 different places," Jamal replied with a grin. Despite his nervousness, excitement radiated from him. MIT representatives would be attending the competition, and a win could secure his dream of a full scholarship. Vivian stepped forward, straightening his already perfect tie. Her eyes softened as she looked at her son, taller than her now, with the same determined chin and thoughtful eyes that had made her fall in love with his father all those years ago. "Remember what we talked about," she said quietly. "Keep your cool no matter what happens. Document everything if there's a problem, and know my rights while respecting authority," Jamal finished. It was a mantra in their household, one that carried extra weight for a young black man in America, especially one traveling alone. Vivian nodded, satisfied. "Transcontinental has a good on-time record. You should arrive with plenty of time to check into the hotel before the evening." Reception. The drive to Atlanta International Airport was filled with last-minute reminders and Jamal's excited chatter about the competition. As they pulled up to the departures curb, Vivian felt the familiar tug of worry that every parent experiences, amplified by the realities she confronted daily in her work. "Text me when you land," she said, hugging him tightly before he exited the car. "I'm so proud of you, Jamal." "Love you, Mom," he replied, grabbing his carry-on bag and the specialized case containing his project materials. Inside the bustling terminal, Jamal navigated security with the careful precision his mother had taught him. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, maintained eye contact with TSA agents, and answered questions clearly and respectfully. Despite following every unwritten rule for avoiding unnecessary scrutiny, he was still pulled aside for a random search while watching several white passengers walk through without additional screening. By the time he reached his gate, boarding had already begun for Transcontinental Airlines Flight 2467. Jamal joined the line for first-class boarding. His mother had splurged on the ticket as a gift, wanting his first flying experience to be special. "Excuse me, young man. This line is for first-class passengers only," said the gate agent without looking up from her computer. "Yes, I know," Jamal replied politely, sliding his boarding pass across the counter. "I'm in seat 3A. The agent's eyes flickered with surprise as she scanned his ticket. "Oh, very well then," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with previous passengers. Jamal took a deep breath and boarded the plane, reminding himself of his mother's advice. "Their prejudice is not your burden to carry." At Uichi, the aircraft door, a flight attendant with Meredith Holloway on her name tag, greeted passengers with a practiced smile. When Jamal approached, however, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "First time flying?" she asked with forced brightness, glancing at his boarding pass. "Yes, ma'am," Jamal answered. "Well, first class is to your right. Seat numbers are clearly marked," she said, her tone suggesting she was explaining something to a child rather than a near adult. Jamal nodded politely and made his way to seat 3A, stowing his backpack carefully in the overhead compartment while keeping his project case at his feet as planned. He observed how Meredith warmly guided white passengers to their seats, offering to help with their bags and making genuine conversation. As he settled into the plush seat, an elderly white gentleman with kind eyes and a tweed jacket approached the adjacent seat 3B. "Looks like we're neighbors for the next few hours," the man said cheerfully, extending his hand. "Dr. Walter Bennett, Harvard Department of Physics." Jamal shook his hand, immediately recognizing the name. "Dr. Bennett, I've read your papers on fluid dynamics. They were hugely influential for my project. I'm Jamal Washington." Dr. Bennett's eyebrows rose with interest. "Are you perhaps headed to the National Youth Science Competition?" "Yes, sir. My project explores applications of biomimetic principles to improve aircraft wing efficiency," Jamal explained, his previous nervousness giving way to enthusiasm. "Well, what a coincidence. I'm one of the judges this year," Dr. Bennett chuckled. "Don't worry, I won't ask for any preview. That would hardly be fair to the other contestants." Their conversation continued as other passengers boarded. Dr. Bennett treated Jamal with the respect of a fellow scientist rather than a high school student, asking thoughtful questions about his academic interests and future plans. When Meredith came by to offer pre-departure beverages, her demeanor shifted noticeably as she addressed Dr. Bennett with warm deference. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today? Orange juice, coffee, or perhaps champagne?" "Coffee would be lovely, thank you," Dr. Bennett replied. Meredith nodded and then turned to Jamal with a markedly cooler expression. "And for you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she expected him to order something inappropriate. "Apple juice? Please," Jamal said. "We only serve orange juice and cranberry before takeoff," Meredith replied quickly. "Orange juice would be fine, thank you," Jamal said, noting that the white businessman across the aisle had just been served apple juice. Dr. Bennett noticed too, his eyes narrowing slightly as Meredith walked away. "You handled that well," he, said quietly. Jamal shrugged. "I've had plenty of practice." "That's unfortunate," Dr. Bennett replied, his voice carrying a weight of understanding that surprised Jamal. "One would hope that excellence like yours would be met with nothing but encouragement." The flight began its boarding process in earnest, and Jamal observed Meredith's interactions with other passengers. With white passengers, she was attentive and warm. With the few other passengers of color, she was professional, but noticeably less engaged. And with Jamal, there seemed to be an undercurrent of suspicion in her every interaction. As the plane prepared for departure, Jamal texted his mother one last time. "Boarding complete. Taking off soon. Everything's fine." He didn't mention the, subtle discrimination he'd already faced. His mother had enough to worry about with her high-pressure job, and besides, he was used to it. What he didn't know was that this flight would test his resilience in ways he never imagined. The transcontinental airlines flight took off smoothly, climbing through scattered clouds into the clear blue sky above. Jamal's initial excitement about flying was tempered by Meredith's continuing cold behavior, but he tried to focus on the positive. Dr. Bennett's friendly conversation and the incredible view from his window seat. Approximately 45 minutes into the flight, Meredith began the first-class meal service. She moved methodically from row to row, laying white tablecloths and setting up trays with practiced efficiency. When she reached Jamal's row, she served Dr. Bennett first, carefully arranging his breakfast and asking if everything was to his satisfaction. When she turned to serve Jamal, her movements became noticeably less careful. She practically dropped the tray onto his table, causing his orange juice to slosh over the rim of the glass and onto his shirt sleeve. "Oh, I'm sorry," Meredith said, her tone suggesting anything but genuine remorse. She handed him a single napkin. "Be more careful." "But I didn't," Jamal began, then stopped himself, remembering his mother's advice about choosing his battles. He simply dabbed at the spreading stain with the inadequate napkin. Dr. Bennett frowned. "I believe another napkin or two might be in order," he suggested to Meredith. "And perhaps some club soda for the stain?" Meredith's smile tightened. "Of course, sir," she replied, returning moments later with additional napkins that she handed to Dr. Bennett rather than Jamal, before quickly moving on to the next row. "Thank you," Jamal said quietly to Dr. Bennett. The older man shook his head slightly. "No need to thank me. Her behavior is completely unprofessional." He lowered his voice. "I don't wish to presume, but I suspect this isn't the first time you've encountered such treatment." Jamal carefully cut into his omelet. "My mom says that acknowledging discrimination is important, but letting it consume you is giving away your power." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Dr. Bennett replied. "What does she do for a living, if you don't mind my asking?" "She works for the government," Jamal said, with the practiced vagueness his mother had taught him. Few people needed to know the specifics of Vivian Washington's position, especially strangers. As they ate, Jamal's mind drifted to a similar incident from his sophomore year. Despite having the highest grades in his AP physics class, his teacher had accused him of cheating on a particularly difficult exam. It had taken his mother coming to the school, requesting to see the teacher's grading records for the past 5 years, and pointing out the statistical improbability of her accusations before the teacher reluctantly acknowledged Jamal's achievement. The memory still stung, but it had also strengthened his resolve to excel despite others' low expectations. The meal service concluded, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly as some passengers decided to nap during the flight. Dr. Bennett pulled out a scientific journal, occasionally sharing interesting passages with Jamal. Their conversation drifted through various scientific topics, with the older scientists seeming genuinely impressed by Jamal's knowledge and insights. About an hour later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Richard Hayes speaking. We're cruising at 35,000 feet, making good time to Boston. Weather ahead looks clear and we're expecting an on-time arrival. I'm going to turn off the seatbelt sign for now, but please keep it fastened when you're in your seat." Shortly thereafter, Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit for a brief walk through the cabin, as was his custom on longer flights. He stopped to chat with several passengers, including a brief exchange with Jamal and Dr. Bennett. "First time flying with us?" Captain Hayes asked Jamal with a genuine smile. "Yes, sir. First time flying ever, actually," Jamal replied. "Well, we're honored to be your first flight. Heading to Boston for something special?" "He's a finalist in the National Youth Science Competition," Dr. Bennett interjected proudly. "One of only 20 nationwide." Captain Hayes looked impressed. "Congratulations, young man. That's quite an achievement." He extended his hand, which Jamal shook firmly. "Enjoy the rest of your flight. Boston's beautiful this time of year." As the captain continued his rounds, Jamal noticed Meredith watching, the interaction with narrowed eyes from the galley area. She whispered something to another flight attendant, a younger woman whose name tag read Amanda Peters. Both glanced in Jamal's direction, with Amanda looking more curious than suspicious. "I need to use the restroom," Jamal told Dr. Bennett, who nodded and moved his legs to allow Jamal to pass. The first-class lavatory was occupied, so Jamal waited patiently in the small area near the galley. He could hear Meredith's hushed voice around the corner. "I'm telling you, something's not right. Did you see his carry-on? He's been guarding it this whole time, and he's way too interested in the flight path and aircraft specifications. He's talking to Dr. Bennett about science," Amanda replied. "The kid's going to some competition." "That's what he says," Meredith hissed. "But I've been flying this route for 15 years. I know when someone doesn't belong, and that boy does not belong in first class." Jamal felt his chest tighten, but he maintained his composure. The lavatory door opened, and he slipped inside, taking a few deep breaths to calm himself. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Their ignorance is not your responsibility to fix." When he returned to his seat, he discovered that Dr. Bennett had dozed off, his journal open on his lap. Jamal settled back in, pulled out his phone to review some notes about his project, and then realized he'd left his wireless earbuds in his backpack in the overhead compartment. Not wanting to disturb Dr. Bennett, he decided to wait. What Jamal didn't see was Meredith watching him intently from the galley. When he briefly closed his eyes to visualize a particular aspect of his project, she seized the opportunity. Moving with deliberate casualness, she approached his row, ostensibly to collect trash. As she did so, she glanced down at Jamal's phone screen, which displayed complex diagrams of his aerodynamics project. Her eyes widened at the technical drawings and equations. Without understanding the scientific context, the aircraft wing cross-sections and turbulence pattern simulations looked suspicious to her untrained eye. She also noticed the specialized case at Jamal's feet, secured with multiple latches. Returning to the galley, Meredith pulled Amanda aside. "Did you see what he's looking at on his phone? Some kind of aircraft schematics. And he's got a strange case under his seat." Amanda frowned. "Are you sure you're not overreacting? He's just a kid." "Better safe than sorry these days," Meredith replied firmly. "I'm going to notify the air marshal." While Jamal remained unaware, Meredith made her way to a particular passenger seated in the middle of economy class. Air Marshal Jackson Boyd, a stocky man in his 40s who traveled this route regularly. She leaned down and whispered in his ear, describing her concerns about the young black passenger in first class, with the suspicious diagrams and secured case. When Jamal finally stood to retrieve his backpack from the overhead bin, he was surprised to find it slightly rearranged from how he had carefully packed it. His project notebook had been moved, and several pages appeared to have been hastily flipped through. A creeping sense of unease began to form in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right. As he sat back down, he noticed Meredith and Amanda, watching him from the galley, along with a new face, a stern-looking man who was now making his way toward first class with purposeful strides. "Excuse me, sir." The stern-looking man stood in the aisle beside Jamal's seat, his voice low but commanding. "I need you to come with me." Jamal looked up in confusion. "I'm sorry. What's this about?" "Air Marshal Jackson Boyd," the man said, flashing a badge briefly. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been raised." Dr. Bennett stirred from his nap, blinking in confusion at the scene unfolding beside him. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his academic authority evident in his tone. "This doesn't concern you, sir," Marshal Boyd replied without taking his eyes off Jamal. "Young man, please come with me now." Jamal's heart pounded, but he remembered his mother's guidance for situations like this. Stay calm. Be respectful, but know your rights. Document everything. "May I ask what concerns have been raised?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice steady despite his rising anxiety. Instead of answering, Marshal Boyd gestured for him to stand. "Bring your belongings with you." By now, other first-class passengers had noticed the confrontation. Several had phones out, recording the interaction. Meredith stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed with a satisfied expression, while Amanda hovered uncertainly behind her. "I haven't done anything wrong," Jamal stated clearly, making sure his voice was captured by the nearest recording phones. "We've received reports of suspicious behavior and materials," Marshal Boyd said. "Your cooperation will make this easier for everyone." Jamal slowly gathered his phone and the case containing his science project. "I'm a high school student traveling to a science competition. These are my project materials." "We'll discuss that in private," the marshal insisted. Dr. Bennett stood up. "I can vouch for this young man. He's Jamal Washington, a finalist in the National Youth Science Competition. I'm Dr. Walter Bennett from Harvard, one of the competition judges." Marshal Boyd hesitated, glancing between the respected-looking, older white man and the young black teenager. Before he could respond, Meredith stepped forward. "He's been acting suspiciously the entire flight," she declared loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Looking at aircraft schematics, asking about flight paths, and he has that locked case." "Those are aerodynamic design diagrams for my project," Jamal explained, struggling to keep his voice calm. "And I never asked about flight paths." Several passengers began murmuring among themselves. Some looked suspicious, while others appeared concerned about the treatment Jamal was receiving. "Just come with me," Marshal Boyd said, his hand moving to rest near his concealed weapon. "We'll sort this out." Jamal stood, knowing that resistance would only escalate the situation. As he moved into the aisle, he tried to catch the eye of passengers who were recording. "My name is Jamal Washington. I'm 17 years old and traveling to the National Youth Science Competition in Boston. I've done nothing wrong." Marshal Boyd guided him toward the back of the plane, where a small area near the rear galley offered some privacy. Once there, he began questioning Jamal aggressively. "Let's see some ID," he demanded. Jamal carefully reached for his wallet and produced his school ID and the government-issued travel ID his mother had helped him obtain. "What's in the case?" Boyd asked, pointing to Jamal's project materials. "It's my science project, a working model demonstrating biomimetic principles applied to aircraft wing design. It's completely harmless." "Open it." Jamal carefully unlatched the case, revealing a sophisticated but clearly handmade model wing assembly with sensors attached. Boyd looked confused but still suspicious. "And what's on your phone?" "The flight attendant reported you were viewing suspicious diagrams." "They're technical drawings for my project. I can show you." While this interrogation continued, Dr. Bennett had followed to the back of the plane, abandoning his comfortable first-class seat to advocate for Jamal. "This is absurd," he told a nearby flight attendant. "That young man is a brilliant student being harassed for doing nothing more than existing while black." Back in first class, the confrontation had become the main topic of conversation. One passenger, a middle-aged white woman, approached Meredith. "I was watching that boy the whole flight. He did nothing suspicious whatsoever. What exactly are you accusing him of?" Meredith's response was defensive. "Ma'am, we have protocols for suspicious behavior. He matches several indicators." "What indicators?" "Being black in first class?" the woman challenged. Meanwhile, Jamal was attempting to call his mother, but Marshal Boyd stopped him. "No phone calls until we complete our investigation." "I have the right to contact my parent," Jamal insisted. "I'm a minor." "Not during a security investigation," Boyd incorrectly claimed. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes received a briefing from Amanda, who was beginning to doubt Meredith's claims. "Captain, Meredith reported suspicious behavior from the young passenger in 3A, but honestly, I think she might be overreacting. Dr. Bennett from Harvard is vouching for him." Captain Hayes frowned. He had met the young man briefly and had seen nothing concerning. However, protocols dictated that any security concern raised by crew members had to be investigated. "Keep things calm back there. I'll contact dispatch for guidance." The captain made a call to airline dispatch, describing the situation, based solely on Meredith's report, which had escalated from suspicious behavior to claims that Jamal had been asking detailed questions about the aircraft's vulnerabilities, a complete fabrication. Dispatch recommended diverting to the nearest suitable airport, Philadelphia International. Captain Hayes made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security concern, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Philadelphia. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A wave of anxiety rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances, many looking toward the back of the plane where Jamal was still being questioned. "This is completely unnecessary," Dr. Bennett protested. "You're disrupting an entire flight based on unfounded suspicions about a teenage science student." Marshal Boyd ignored him, instead instructing Jamal to return to a seat in the last row, far from his assigned first-class accommodation. "Stay here until we land," he ordered. Dr. Bennett, refusing to abandon Jamal, took the seat beside him. "I'm staying with you," he told the young man. "This is utterly shameful." Jamal sat rigidly, his face a careful mask hiding the turmoil within. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, treated like a criminal. His thoughts turned to his mother. What would Vivian do in this situation? She would document everything, remain dignified, and prepare to fight back through proper channels. As the plane began its descent into Philadelphia, Jamal asked a passing flight attendant for a piece of paper. On it, he began methodically writing down every detail of what had transpired, including names, times, and exact quotes. It was what his mother would have done. Is it fair that a talented young student was subjected to this treatment simply because of his race? What would you have done if you witnessed this situation unfold? Comment number 1 if you believe Meredith should be immediately fired for her actions. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories about fighting injustice. What do you think happened when this plane landed in Philadelphia? The situation was about to take an unexpected turn that no one on that flight could have predicted. The transcontinental airlines flight touched down at Philadelphia International Airport 20 minutes later, taxiing to a remote area of the tarmac rather than a regular gate. Through his window, Jamal could see several airport police vehicles and a Transportation Security Administration truck waiting on the ground. All passengers, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, the captain announced. We'll be deplaning a passenger for additional screening before continuing to our destination. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what was happening. Jamal was being removed from the flight as a security threat. He felt a complex mixture of emotions: humiliation, anger, fear, and beneath it all, a cold determination to maintain his dignity despite the injustice unfolding around him. "This is preposterous," Dr. Bennett muttered beside him. "I've never witnessed such a blatant abuse of authority in all my years of flying." 2 Philadelphia airport police officers boarded the plane through the rear door. Marshal Boyd immediately approached them, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward Jamal. Meredith joined them, her exaggerated hand movements suggesting she was embellishing whatever story she was telling. One of the officers, a tall man with a crew cut, approached. "Jamal, sir, you'll need to come with us for additional questioning." Jamal stood, gathering his belongings with deliberate calm. "May I know the specific reason I'm being detained?" he asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We'll discuss that once we're off the aircraft," the officer replied. As Jamal moved toward the exit, passengers throughout the cabin watched in uncomfortable silence. Some looked away, unwilling to witness the scene. Others recorded with their phones, documenting the situation. A few called out words of support. "This isn't right," a woman exclaimed from several rows ahead. "Stay strong, young man," an elderly passenger called out. Dr. Bennett followed close behind. "I'm coming with him. I'm a witness to this entire situation." The airport police officer blocked his path. "Sir, please return to your seat. The aircraft will continue to Boston once we've completed our security protocols. I'm Dr. Walter Bennett, Harvard University faculty and a judge for the competition this young man is traveling to attend. I insist on accompanying him as an advocate. He is a minor being questioned without parental representation." Despite Dr. Bennett's credentials and reasonable request, the officer remained unmoved. "Sir, return to your seat now, or you can join him for interfering with a security operation." Dr. Bennett reluctantly stepped back, but called to Jamal. "I'll remain in Philadelphia. I'll contact University Council immediately." Jamal nodded gratefully before being escorted down the jet bridge. The humiliation of walking past rows of staring passengers was overwhelming, but he kept his head high, channeling his mother's strength. Off the aircraft, Jamal was led to a secure room in a restricted area of the airport. The sterile interrogation room contained only a metal table and 3 chairs. His project case was taken from him and placed on a separate table for inspection by TSA agents who looked utterly confused by the sophisticated model within. "I need to call my mother," Jamal stated firmly once they were inside. "I'm 17 years old, and I have the right to have a parent present during questioning." "You can make calls after we've completed our initial security assessment," replied the officer who had escorted him from the plane. His name badge read, Officer Thomas Miller. "Am I under arrest?" Jamal asked, remembering his mother's lessons about civil rights. "This is a security detention, not a criminal arrest," Officer Miller explained, his tone professional but not overtly hostile. As Jamal took a seat at the table, his mind flashed back to a conversation with his mother just months earlier. They had been discussing how to handle potential confrontations with authorities, a necessary conversation between a black mother and son in America. "If you're ever detained," Vivian had told him, her FBI training evident in her precise instructions, "remain calm but assertive about your rights. Don't volunteer information beyond identifying yourself. Ask for legal representation and parental notification immediately and repeatedly." Document everything you can remember afterward. Names, badge numbers, times, and exact words used. Now sitting in that cold airport room, Jamal followed her guidance to the letter. I respectfully request legal representation and notification of my mother immediately, he stated clearly. I am a minor traveling to an academic competition, and I have done nothing wrong. Officer Miller studied him with an unreadable expression before leaving the room. Through the door, Jamal could hear raised voices, Meredith's distinctive tone standing out as she continued to press her fabricated concerns. He had diagrams of aircraft structures and was asking about vulnerable systems, she insisted, her voice carrying through the thin walls. Ma'am, we've examined his materials, a male voice responded with evident frustration. They're clearly academic in nature. The diagrams are scientific illustrations for a research project. Well, he was acting suspiciously, Meredith countered, her voice rising defensively. Better safe than sorry in today's climate. Meanwhile, in the main terminal, Dr. Bennett had indeed stayed behind rather than continuing to Boston. After disembarking with the other passengers who had been moved to a replacement aircraft, he immediately began making calls, first to the Harvard University General Counsel's office, then to colleagues with connections in Philadelphia. This is Walter Bennett, he said urgently into his phone. I need your help. I've just witnessed a clear case of racial profiling on my flight. A brilliant young scientist, one of our competition finalists, has been detained without cause. As Dr. Bennett advocated from the terminal, Jamal remained alone in the interrogation room for nearly 30 minutes before Officer Miller returned, accompanied by another officer and a TSA agent carrying Jamal's project case. Mr. Washington, the TSA agent began, can you explain exactly what this device is? Jamal straightened in his chair. It's a working model demonstrating biomimetic principles applied to aircraft wing design. I created it for the National Youth Science Competition in Boston, where I'm a finalist. The design mimics the turbulence control features of owl feathers to improve efficiency and reduce noise. The TSA agent nodded slowly. That matches our technical assessment. It's quite impressive. Work, actually. Officer Miller took a seat across from Jamal. We've reviewed the initial report from the flight attendant, he said carefully, and we're finding some inconsistencies between her claims and the evidence. I was racially profiled, Jamal stated, plainly. The flight attendant, Meredith Holloway, treated me differently from other passengers from the moment I boarded. She fabricated security concerns because she was uncomfortable with a young black passenger in first class. Miller's expression remained neutral, but he didn't immediately dismiss Jamal's claim. We're reviewing the aircraft's security footage now. What Officer Miller didn't say was that the initial review of that footage was already undermining Meredith's story. There was no evidence of Jamal asking about aircraft vulnerabilities or behaving suspiciously. Instead, the footage showed him engaged in scientific discussion with Dr. Bennett and being subjected to noticeably different treatment from the flight crew. In the terminal, Regina Williams, the customer service manager for Philadelphia International Airport, had been alerted to the situation by one of Dr. Bennett's contacts. A black woman in her 50s with 25 years of airline industry experience, she immediately recognized the potential gravity of the situation. Dr. Bennett, I'm Regina Williams, she introduced herself, approaching the professor in the terminal waiting area. I understand one of the passengers from your flight has been detained. Yes, a brilliant young scientist named Jamal Washington, Dr. Bennett explained. The flight attendant's claims were completely fabricated. I was seated next to him the entire flight. Regina's expression tightened. This isn't the first incident we've had with transcontinental crews. Let me see what I can find out. As airport officials began unraveling the truth behind Meredith's false report, Jamal sat alone in the interrogation room, his thoughts turning to the competition he was now likely to miss. All those months of work, the opportunity to present to MIT recruiters, vanishing because of one flight attendant's prejudice. He thought of his mother, currently unreachable in a high-level FBI meeting. Vivian Washington had raised him to face adversity with strength and dignity, but even she couldn't have prepared him for this level of injustice. What Jamal didn't know was that Vivian had just received an automated alert on her phone, a notification from the tracking app she had insisted Jamal install before his trip. The alert indicated that his phone had remained stationary at Philadelphia International Airport for over 30 minutes, despite his flight being scheduled to continue to Boston. In her meeting in Washington, D.C., Vivian discreetly checked this notification, immediately sensing that something was wrong. She excused herself from the meeting, stepping into the hallway to investigate further. The mother's intuition that had served her throughout her career was now sending alarm signals that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, the TSA technical expert who had examined Jamal's project was explaining to his superiors that far from being suspicious, the young man's work was actually innovative and impressive. The kids created a functioning model that demonstrates principles NASA is currently researching, he explained. It's not a threat, it's brilliant engineering from a high school student. As these revelations began to undermine Meredith's claims, Jamal continued to wait, documenting everything on the sheet of paper he had requested. Little did anyone know that Vivian Washington was already setting events in motion that would transform this incident from a case of everyday discrimination into a situation that would send shockwaves through transcontinental airlines and beyond. In Washington, D.C., Deputy Director Vivian Washington stood in the hallway outside her meeting room, her normally composed demeanor showing rare cracks of concern. The tracking app on her phone showed Jamal's location firmly fixed at Philadelphia International Airport, nowhere near where he should have been at this point in his journey. 3 unanswered texts and 2 direct calls to his phone had yielded nothing. This was completely out of character for her responsible son. Something was wrong. "Rebecca," she called to her assistant who had followed her into the hallway. "I need you to contact Philadelphia International Airport security. My son's flight appears to have been diverted, and I can't reach him." Rebecca nodded, immediately understanding the urgency. "Yes, ma'am. And you're meeting with the Attorney General's staff?" "Tell them it's a family emergency," Vivian replied, already scrolling through her contacts for someone who could provide answers faster than standard channels. "And get me on the next available transport to Philadelphia." As a high-ranking FBI official with a specialization in civil rights violations, Vivian had resources few other parents could access. Within minutes, she had contacted the FBI field office in Philadelphia, requesting information about any security incidents at the airport involving Transcontinental Airlines Flight 2467. Meanwhile, in the airport detention room, Jamal continued to face questioning, though the tone had subtly shifted. Officer Miller had returned with a printout of Jamal's academic credentials and competition acceptance letter, which airport security had found during a basic background check. "These are quite impressive," Miller said, his voice carrying a hint of newfound respect. "National Merit Scholar, perfect SAT scores, early acceptance offers from multiple Ivy League schools." Jamal maintained his composure. "Thank you, but that shouldn't matter. Even if I weren't academically accomplished, I shouldn't be detained without cause." Miller nodded slowly. "You're right about that." He hesitated before continuing. "We've reviewed the security footage from the aircraft, and there are discrepancies between what was reported and what we observed." Before Jamal could respond, there was a knock at the door. Another officer entered and whispered something to Miller, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "I'll be right back," Miller told Jamal, leaving him alone once more. Outside the room, Regina Williams, the airport customer service manager, had arrived, with Dr. Bennett in tow. "Officer Miller, I understand you're handling the detention of a passenger from Flight 2467, she said. "That's correct, ma'am." "I've spoken with Dr. Bennett here, who was seated next to the young man throughout the flight. His account directly contradicts the flight attendant's claims." Miller glanced between them. "We're already finding inconsistencies in her report. The TSA has cleared the passenger's project materials as legitimate scientific equipment." "Then why is he still being detained?" Dr. Bennett demanded. "We're following protocol," Miller explained, "but I agree the evidence doesn't support continued detention." What none of them knew was that Transcontinental Airlines corporate offices were now involved. The airline's public relations team had received alerts about social media posts describing the incident, with several videos showing Jamal being escorted off the plane already gaining traction online. The hashtag Switcher Flying While Black was trending alongside the airline's name, a PR nightmare in the making. In the airline's headquarters, executives scrambled to get ahead of the story. "Get me everything on this situation," demanded Catherine Reynolds, the vice president of customer relations. "Who authorized a diversion to Philadelphia? What evidence supported this action?" Back at the airport, Jamal had been left alone for nearly 20 minutes when the door opened again. This time, a different officer entered with a bottle of water and a sandwich. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, placing the items on the table. "Sorry about the wait. There are some complications with your case." "What complications?" Jamal asked. "Either I did something wrong or I didn't." "It's not that simple," the officer replied uncomfortably. "There are procedures we have to follow when security concerns are raised during a flight. Even when those concerns are based on racial bias rather than actual suspicious behavior," Jamal challenged. The officer shifted awkwardly. "I'm not authorized to discuss the details, but for what it's worth, it seems like things are moving in your favor." Outside, Regina Williams was reviewing Meredith Holloway's employment file, which she had requested from Transcontinental's station manager. What she found was troubling but not surprising. 3 previous passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment in the past year alone, she told Dr. Bennett and Officer Miller. All filed by passengers of color, all dismissed after cursory investigations. "That establishes a pattern," Miller noted, his law enforcement training kicking in. "Indeed it does," Regina agreed. "And I've got contacts at other airports who tell me she's had similar issues throughout her career. Transcontinental has simply been moving her to different routes when complaints pile up rather than addressing the underlying problem." As they discussed the emerging pattern, Vivian Washington was boarding an FBI jet at Reagan National Airport. She had pulled strings rarely used for personal matters, but her instincts told her Jamal needed her, and as both an FBI leader and a mother, she trusted those instincts implicitly. During the short flight to Philadelphia, Vivian made more calls, piecing together what little information was available. By the time the jet touched down, she had a clearer picture. Jamal had been removed from his flight following security. Concerns raised by a flight attendant, concerns that appeared increasingly dubious as more facts emerged. While Vivian was en route, Captain Hayes and the remainder of Flight 2467's passengers had continued to Boston. Upon landing, Hayes made his way directly to the airline's operations center, uncomfortable with how events had unfolded. "I want to file a formal report about today's incident," he told the station manager. "Based on what I observed and what I've learned since, I believe we had a serious lapse in judgment that led to an unnecessary diversion and the mistreatment of a passenger." "That's a serious claim, Richard," the manager replied. "Especially since it involves one of your crew members." "Which is precisely why I need to report it," Hayes insisted. "If we don't address this kind of behavior, we're complicit in it." Back in Philadelphia, the TSA technical expert who had examined Jamal's project had reached a conclusion that further undermined Meredith's claims. This kid's design could actually improve aircraft efficiency by up to 8% if scaled properly, he explained to his supervisor. "It's innovative work based on sound scientific principles. There's nothing remotely suspicious about it." This assessment made its way to Officer Miller, providing yet another piece of evidence that the detention had been unwarranted from the start. Miller returned to the interrogation room, where Jamal sat quietly documenting his experience. "Mr. Washington," Miller began, his tone noticeably more respectful than before, "I want to update you on the situation. We've reviewed the aircraft security footage, your project materials, and your background. We've found no evidence supporting the security concerns that led to this detention." Jamal looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Does that mean I'm free to go?" "There are still some procedural matters to complete," Miller hedged. "But yes, we're working toward releasing you as quickly as possible." "I've missed my connecting flight to Boston," Jamal pointed out, "and possibly my chance to participate in the competition I've spent months preparing for." Miller had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I understand, and I'm sorry for that inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Jamal repeated, allowing a hint of his frustration to show. "I was publicly humiliated, removed from a flight, and detained for hours because of racial profiling. That's not an inconvenience, Officer Miller. That's a violation of my civil rights. Before Miller could respond, his radio crackled. He stepped outside briefly before returning with a changed demeanor. "There's someone here to see you," he said, opening the door wider. Jamal expected to see Dr. Bennett, or perhaps an airline representative with hollow apologies. Instead, his heart leaped when he recognized the familiar figure of his mother, Vivian Washington, being escorted down the hallway. What Officer Miller didn't yet know was that the woman approaching wasn't just any concerned parent. She was Deputy Director Vivian Washington of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and she was about to transform this incident from a routine case of discrimination into a situation that would send shockwaves through the entire airline industry. Vivian Washington walked down the sterile airport corridor with the controlled precision that had become her trademark at the FBI. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry, and an expression that revealed nothing of her internal thoughts. A professional mask she had perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations and investigations. To the security personnel escorting her, she appeared to be exactly what she had initially presented herself as: a concerned mother arriving to collect her detained son. Only the Philadelphia FBI field office special agent who had met her plane knew her true position within the bureau, and he had been instructed to maintain that confidentiality for now. Vivian had made a tactical decision to observe how airport security and airline representatives handled the situation before revealing her professional identity. It was an investigative technique she had employed countless times, allowing people to show their true colors before they realized the significance of who they were dealing with. When she reached the detention room door, Officer Miller stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Thomas Miller. You must be Jamal's mother." "Yes, I am," Vivian replied, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. "I'd like to see my son immediately." "Of course, we were just completing the processing for his release," Miller explained. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding—" "A misunderstanding?" Vivian interrupted, her tone making Miller instinctively straighten his posture. "My 17-year-old son was removed from his flight, detained for hours without parental notification, and questioned without legal representation, all based on what appears to be racially motivated suspicion. That sounds less like a misunderstanding and more like a civil rights violation." Miller blinked, momentarily taken aback by her precise legal assessment. "Ma'am, I assure you we've been following standard security protocols." "Then, your protocols need revision," Vivian stated firmly. "Now, I'd like to see my son, and then I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge of this operation." Miller nodded, opening the door to reveal Jamal sitting at the metal table, his posture straight despite the hours of detention. When he saw his mother, his careful composure briefly cracked, relief washing over his features. "Mom," he said simply, standing up. Vivian crossed the room and embraced him tightly, allowing herself this moment of maternal concern before returning to the professional approach the situation required. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Jamal nodded against her shoulder. "I'm okay. I did what you taught me. Stayed calm, asserted my rights, documented everything." Vivian pulled back slightly, examining his face with pride. "That's my son." Then turning to Officer Miller while keeping one arm protectively around Jamal's shoulders, she said, "I'd like to see the incident report and all evidence used to justify this detention." "I'll need to check with my supervisor," Miller replied. "By all means," Vivian agreed. "While you're doing that, please inform them that I'm requesting all security footage from the aircraft and airport, the flight attendant's statement, and any communications between the airline and airport security regarding this incident." Something in her tone, the precise terminology and confident authority, caused Miller to look at her more carefully. "Ma'am, may I ask what your profession is?" Vivian maintained eye contact without blinking. "For now, I'm simply a mother concerned about the treatment of her son. The rest can wait until I've spoken with your superiors." Through a one-way observation window, Vivian had already noted several figures watching the interaction: airport, security officials, an airline representative, and what appeared to be a TSA supervisor. She had deliberately positioned herself to be visible to them, knowing that her controlled demeanor and professional language would be sending signals that this was not a typical parent-child reunion after a security incident. Officer Miller excused himself to consult his superiors, leaving Vivian and Jamal alone in the room. As soon as the door closed, Vivian's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't leave anything out." Jamal recounted the events methodically, just as she had taught him, starting with the subtle discrimination from Meredith at boarding, progressing through the in-flight treatment, and ending with his detention. He handed her the detailed notes he had taken during his detention. Vivian listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly grave. When he finished, she nodded once. "You handled this perfectly, Jamal. I'm so proud of you." Then, after a brief pause, "Are you ready for what comes next?" Jamal straightened his shoulders. "You're going to reveal who you are, aren't you?" "Yes," Vivian confirmed. "What happened to you today isn't just wrong, it's potentially illegal. Discrimination, false reporting, civil rights violations. The airline needs to understand the seriousness of this situation." "Will it make a difference?" Jamal asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through his composed exterior. "It already has," Vivian assured him. "Look at how quickly things changed once they realized your mother was coming. But we're not just seeking resolution for you, we're seeking change for everyone who might face this kind of treatment." And their conversation was interrupted by the return of Officer Miller, accompanied by his supervisor, the airport security director, and a woman in a Transcontinental Airlines uniform, who introduced herself as Diane Roberts, the airline's Philadelphia station manager. "Mrs. Washington," Roberts began with a practiced corporate smile. "On behalf of Transcontinental Airlines, I want to extend our sincere apologies for this unfortunate incident. We're prepared to rebook your son on the next available flight to Boston and upgrade him to first class at no additional charge." Vivian regarded her coolly. "That's your solution? After racially profiling my son, publicly humiliating him, and potentially causing him to miss a competition that could determine his academic future, you offer a rebooking and an upgrade he already had?" Roberts's smile faltered slightly. "We take these situations very seriously, Mrs. Washington. I assure you we'll be conducting a thorough internal investigation." "I'm sure you will," Vivian replied, her tone making it clear she believed nothing of the sort. She reached into her purse and removed her FBI credentials, placing them on the table with deliberate calm. "But so will we." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Roberts's face paled as she read the identification. "Vivian Washington, Deputy Director, Civil Rights Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The security director stepped forward, extending his hand. "Director Washington, I'm Charles Pemberton, Director of Security for Philadelphia International Airport. Had we known your position—" "My position should be irrelevant," Vivian interrupted, not taking his hand. "My son deserves the same treatment as any other passenger, regardless of who his mother is. The fact that his treatment changed once you learned my identity only underscores the discriminatory nature of this entire incident." Roberts attempted to regain control of the situation. "Director Washington, I want to assure you that Transcontinental Airlines does not condone discrimination of any kind. This appears to be an isolated incident involving a single employee's judgment." "Is it?" Vivian challenged. "Because I've just received information that the flight attendant in question, Meredith Holloway, has a history of similar complaints that your airline has systematically ignored. That suggests a pattern of institutional negligence, not an isolated incident." The revelation that Vivian already had this information, which she had received via text from her assistant during her flight to Philadelphia, visibly rattled Roberts. "I wasn't aware of any previous incidents," Roberts claimed weakly. "Then you should be concerned about your company's information-sharing practices," Vivian replied. "Now I'd like to speak directly with this flight attendant." "Ms. Holloway has completed her statement and been released to return home," Roberts explained. "She's no longer at the airport." Vivian's expression hardened. "Call her back, immediately." The authority in her voice left no room for debate. Roberts nodded and stepped outside to make the call. While they waited, Vivian turned to address the security director. "Mr. Pemberton, I'll be requesting a full review of your detention procedures, particularly as they relate to minors. My son was questioned without parental notification or legal representation, in direct violation of established protocols." Pemberton nodded uncomfortably. "We'll cooperate fully with any review, Director Washington. I would also be interested to learn why the concerns of Dr. Walter Bennett, a Harvard professor who witnessed the entire incident, were dismissed," Vivian continued. "Is it standard practice to ignore credible witnesses who contradict questionable security reports?" Before Pemberton could respond, the door opened and Captain Richard Hayes entered, still in his pilot's uniform. He had just arrived from Boston on another flight, having requested to return to Philadelphia immediately after learning about the escalating situation. "Captain Hayes," Officer Miller said with surprise, "I didn't expect to see you back here." "I felt it was important to be present," Hayes explained before turning to Vivian and Jamal. "Mrs. Washington, I'm Richard Hayes, the captain of Flight 2467. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. I made the decision to divert based on information provided by my crew that I now believe was inaccurate and potentially biased." Vivian studied him carefully. "I appreciate your taking responsibility, Captain Hayes. That's unfortunately rare in these situations." "Not as rare as you might think," Hayes replied. "Many of us want to do better. The problem is that the systems in place often protect those who discriminate rather than those who face discrimination." His candor surprised Vivian, who nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps this incident can serve as a catalyst for changing those systems." Their conversation was interrupted by Roberts's return, her expression tense. "Ms. Holloway is on her way back to the airport," she announced. "She should arrive within 30 minutes. "Good," Vivian said. "In the meantime, I'd like to see all the evidence that was used to justify my son's detention." As the officials scrambled to comply with her request, Dr. Bennett arrived, having been notified of Vivian's presence by Regina Williams. "Mrs. Washington," he said, extending his hand. "Walter Bennett. I was seated next to your son throughout the flight. I want you to know that your son conducted himself with remarkable dignity throughout this ordeal. Thank you for staying behind." "To support him," Vivian replied, shaking his hand warmly. "Your willingness to advocate for Jamal speaks volumes about your character." "It was the least I could do," Bennett said, "though I'm afraid my protests were largely ignored until your arrival changed the equation." "That's often how these situations unfold," Vivian acknowledged. "Individual voices are dismissed until someone with institutional power forces accountability." The next 30 minutes were spent reviewing security footage, witness statements, and the report filed by Meredith Holloway. With each piece of evidence, the case against the airline strengthened. The security footage clearly showed no suspicious behavior from Jamal, while capturing multiple instances of differential treatment from Meredith. When Meredith finally arrived, escorted by another airline employee, she entered the room with an air of indignation that quickly dissolved when she saw the assembled group, particularly Vivian's authoritative presence. "Ms. Holloway," Vivian began without preamble, "I'm Deputy Director Vivian Washington of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. More importantly, I'm Jamal Washington's mother. I'd like you to explain, in your own words, why you felt it necessary to report my son as a security threat." Meredith's confidence visibly faltered as she realized the gravity of her situation. She was no longer facing a teenager she could intimidate or officials she could mislead. She was facing a mother with the full power of federal law enforcement behind her, and the reckoning she had long avoided had finally arrived. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that suddenly stopped when someone in authority intervened? Comment number 1. If you believe more companies should face real consequences for enabling racial profiling, don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about justice prevailing against discrimination. What do you think will happen to Meredith now that she's face to face with an FBI deputy director who happens to be the mother of the teen she wrongfully accused? The confrontation is about to reach its climax. Outside Philadelphia International Airport, A small group of reporters had gathered. What had begun as routine coverage of an unscheduled flight diversion was quickly evolving into something more significant as word spread that an FBI deputy director was personally involved in the incident. Inside, Meredith Holloway sat rigidly in her chair, avoiding direct eye contact with Vivian Washington. The confident demeanor that had allowed her to falsely report Jamal had evaporated, replaced by the defensive posture of someone who knew their actions couldn't be justified. "I was simply following company protocol for suspicious behavior," Meredith insisted, her voice lacking conviction. The passenger had unusual materials and diagrams that appeared concerning. "What specific training have you received to identify suspicious materials?" Vivian asked, her tone professional but unyielding. Meredith shifted uncomfortably. "We have annual security training. And in this training, are scientific diagrams for a high school competition typically identified as security threats?" Vivian pressed. "Not specifically, no, but—" "Ms. Holloway," Vivian interrupted, "the TSA technical expert has already confirmed that my son's project is exactly what he claimed it to be, an innovative scientific model with potential applications in aerospace engineering. There was nothing suspicious about it to anyone with even basic technical knowledge." Captain Hayes, who had remained in the room, spoke up. "Our crew training specifically warns against making assumptions based on limited technical understanding. If there's genuine concern, the proper procedure is to discreetly consult with the captain first, not to immediately escalate to air marshals." Meredith's face flushed. "I felt the situation warranted immediate action." "Based on what evidence?" Vivian challenged. "The security footage shows my son engaged in scientific discussion with Dr. Bennett. At no point does he exhibit any behavior that matches the profile you described in your report." As Meredith struggled to respond, her phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it nervously but didn't answer. "Is someone coaching you during this meeting, Ms. Holloway?" Vivian asked sharply. "No, it's personal," Meredith stammered. Vivian extended her hand. "Your phone, please." "You can't," Meredith began, then stopped as Vivian's expression hardened. "Ms. Holloway, you're currently involved in a potential federal civil rights investigation. Interfering with that investigation would be unwise." After a moment's hesitation, Meredith reluctantly handed over her phone. Vivian examined the screen, her expression darkening as she read the message from a contact labeled Jeffrey P. "Say as little as possible. Legal team en route. Don't admit fault," Vivian read aloud. "From Jeffrey Palmer, I presume? The CEO of Transcontinental Airlines?" The room fell silent. Diane Roberts, the station manager, paled visibly. "Director, Washington, I wasn't aware that our CEO was personally involved in this matter." "Apparently he is," Vivian replied coldly, returning the phone to Meredith, which suggests this isn't being treated as an isolated incident by a single employee, but rather a corporate crisis requiring executive intervention. As if on cue, Vivian's own phone rang. She checked the display and excused herself momentarily. In the hallway, she answered, "Washington. Director Washington, this is Jeffrey Palmer, CEO of Transcontinental Airlines," came a smooth, practiced voice. "I understand there's been an unfortunate situation involving your son today." "Unfortunate situation" is a remarkably understated description of racial profiling and civil rights violations, Mr. Palmer, Vivian replied. "I want to personally assure you that Transcontinental takes these matters extremely seriously," Palmer continued. "We'd like to offer an immediate settlement to resolve this matter efficiently for all parties involved." Vivian's voice took on an edge that had made countless individuals reconsider their positions throughout her career. "Mr. Palmer, I'm not interested in a settlement that quietly brushes discrimination under the rug. I'm interested in systematic change that prevents other passengers from experiencing what my son experienced today." Palmer's tone shifted subtly. "Of course, and we're committed to reviewing our policies, but surely we can address both your son's specific situation and these broader concerns without unnecessary public scrutiny. The time for private resolution was before your employee falsely accused my son of being a security threat," Vivian stated, Now we're well beyond that point. Meanwhile, in the detention room, an assistant had brought Jamal's confiscated phone and returned it to him. As he powered it on, he was startled to find hundreds of notifications. Videos of his removal from the plane had gone viral on social media platforms, with the hashtag #DamFlyingWhileBlack trending nationwide. Accompanying these videos were calls for boycotts of transcontinental airlines and demands for accountability. Dr. Bennett, who had been quietly observing, leaned toward Jamal. "The competition organizers have been notified about the situation," he said softly. "They've agreed to make special accommodations for your late arrival, if we can get you to Boston by tomorrow morning." Jamal nodded gratefully, though the competition suddenly seemed less important compared to the principles at stake in this confrontation. When Vivian returned to the room, her expression was resolute. "Mr. Palmer's attempting to resolve this with money rather than meaningful change," she announced to the group. "That approach won't be sufficient." Captain Hayes nodded in agreement. "It never is. The company has a pattern of offering settlements with confidentiality clauses rather than addressing the underlying issues." Diane Roberts looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict him. Vivian turned to address the airport security director. "Mr. Pemberton, I'll need copies of all documentation related to this incident for our investigation." "Of course, Director Washington," he agreed quickly. "And Ms. Holloway," Vivian continued, turning her attention back to the flight attendant, "I'd like to discuss your history with the airline. This isn't your first incident involving accusations against passengers of color, is it?" Meredith's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about. 3 formal complaints in the past year alone," Vivian stated, reading from notes her assistant had sent. "All from minority passengers, all claiming discriminatory treatment. Each one dismissed after cursory investigations by Transcontinental." "Those situations were different," Meredith protested weakly. "Were they? Or were they part of a pattern that the airline chose to ignore until it became impossible to do so?" Vivian challenged. As this confrontation unfolded, Jamal was reviewing the social media storm surrounding his situation. Among the supportive messages were troubling comments from people defending Meredith's actions, claiming security concerns justified any level of scrutiny, regardless of the impact on innocent individuals. The clash of perspectives online mirrored the larger societal divisions that Vivian confronted daily in her work. Progress came incrementally, often triggered by incidents exactly like this one, moments when systemic prejudice became too visible to ignore or dismiss. Vivian's phone rang again. This time it was her assistant in Washington. "Director, the Attorney General is personally inquiring about the Philadelphia situation. It's gaining significant attention at headquarters. Tell him I'll provide a full briefing once we've completed the initial investigation," Vivian replied. "And Rebecca, I need transportation arrangements for Jamal to Boston tonight. The competition organizers are making accommodations for his late arrival." "Already arranged," Rebecca confirmed. "An FBI helicopter can transport him directly to Boston within the hour." "Perfect. Thank you." When Vivian returned to the room, once more she found that Transcontinental's legal team had arrived. 3 polished corporate attorneys led by a senior partner from a prestigious Philadelphia law firm. "Director Washington," the lead attorney began smoothly, "I'm Martin Graves, Chief Counsel for Transcontinental Airlines. We'd like to propose an immediate resolution to this unfortunate incident." "I'm listening," Vivian replied coolly. "Transcontinental is prepared to offer significant compensation for your son's distress, along with a formal apology and immediate disciplinary action against the employees involved," Graves stated. "In return, we would request a confidential resolution to prevent any unnecessary damage to all parties' reputations." Vivian's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Graves, what you're describing is a standard corporate approach to making problems disappear rather than addressing their root causes. My son doesn't need Transcontinental's money. What he and countless other passengers need is an airline that doesn't subject people to discrimination based on the color of their skin." Graves maintained his professional demeanor. "Director Washington, we absolutely share that goal, but surely we can work toward systemic improvements without the complications of a public dispute?" "On the contrary," Vivian countered. It's often only through public accountability that meaningful change occurs. My division has investigated dozens of discrimination cases across various industries, and the pattern is consistent. Private settlements lead to minimal reforms, while public scrutiny drives substantive change. As this tense negotiation continued, Jamal sat quietly, observing his mother's masterful handling of the situation. Throughout his life, he had known Vivian Washington as his loving, supportive mother. Seeing her professional persona in action, commanding, strategic, unyielding in pursuit of justice, gave him a new appreciation for the work she did every day. In a quiet moment while the attorneys conferred among themselves, Vivian sat beside Jamal. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. "I'm okay," he assured her. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm proud of what's happening here." Vivian squeezed his hand. "The helicopter will be ready soon to take you to Boston. You should still be able to make the competition." Jamal hesitated. "Maybe I should stay. This seems more important." "No," Vivian said firmly. "You've worked too hard to miss this opportunity. The best response to discrimination is excellence. Go to Boston. Win that competition. Show them exactly what they tried to ground today." After a moment's consideration, Jamal nodded. His mother was right. Allowing this incident to derail his goals would grant a victory to the very prejudice they were fighting against. Outside the airport, the media presence had grown substantially. Word had spread that Deputy Director Washington of the FBI's Civil Rights Division was personally involved in a discrimination case against transcontinental airlines. Reporters from national networks had arrived, preparing for what could become a major story about racial profiling in commercial aviation. Inside, Jeffrey Palmer himself had finally arrived, having flown in on a corporate jet upon realizing the severity of the situation. The airline CEO's attempt to contain the crisis through intermediaries had failed. Now he would have to face Vivian Washington directly. As these powerful forces converged, corporate interests, federal authority, media attention, and public opinion, the confrontation over one teenager's mistreatment was transforming into something much larger, a potential turning point in how one of America's largest airlines addressed the persistent reality of racial discrimination in air travel. The sleek FBI helicopter cut through the evening sky above the eastern seaboard, its rotors slicing the air with rhythmic precision. Inside, Jamal Washington sat beside a bureau pilot, gazing out at the lights of cities and towns passing below. The events of the day swirled in his mind like the turbulence patterns he had studied for his project. Complex, interconnected, and ultimately transformative. 15 minutes to Boston, the pilot informed him through the headset. Competition. Officials will be waiting at the helipad. Jamal nodded, still processing everything that had happened since that morning. What should have been a routine flight had become a national news story and potentially a landmark civil rights case. His phone continued to buzz with notifications as the story spread across social media and news outlets. Back in Philadelphia, Vivian Washington sat across from Jeffrey Palmer, Transcontinental's CEO, in a private conference room at the airport. The corporate attorneys flanked Palmer while FBI counsel had arrived to support Vivian. What had begun as a personal mission to help her son had officially transformed into a federal civil rights investigation. "Director Washington," Palmer began, his practiced corporate smile failing to mask his tension, "I want to personally assure you that the events today do not reflect Transcontinental's values or policies. We're prepared to take immediate corrective action." Vivian regarded him steadily. "Mr. Palmer, I've reviewed your company's handling of discrimination complaints over the past 5 years. There's a clear pattern of dismissing reports, transferring problematic employees rather than disciplining them, and using confidential settlements to avoid public accountability." Palmer's smile faltered. "I'm not sure where you obtained that information." The FBI's Civil Rights Division maintains detailed records on discrimination patterns across industries, Vivian interrupted. "Your airline has appeared in our monitoring system multiple times, though this is the first incident that warranted my personal involvement." She placed a folder on the table between them. "This contains 17 complaints against Meredith Holloway during her 15-year career with your airline. 15 of those complaints came from passengers of color. Each time, your company conducted what could generously be called a cursory investigation before dismissing the complaints and occasionally transferring her to different routes. Palmer glanced at his legal team, visibly uncomfortable. Director Washington, while I can't speak to specific personnel matters, I can assure you that I'm not interested in assurances, Mr. Palmer, Vivian stated firmly. I'm interested in concrete, verifiable changes to your company's policies and practices. She opened the folder and extracted a document. This is a proposed consent decree that would require Transcontinental to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, revise your complaint investigation procedures, establish an independent oversight committee, and create transparent reporting mechanisms for tracking discrimination incidents. Palmer's chief counsel, Martin Graves, reached for the document. This is highly unusual. Typically, these matters are resolved through, "This isn't a typical situation," Vivian cut in. "My division can pursue formal charges of civil rights violations, which would trigger a much more extensive and public investigation. Or Transcontinental can voluntarily adopt these reforms and demonstrate genuine commitment to addressing discrimination." As this high-stakes negotiation unfolded, Captain Hayes was meeting with Amanda Peters, the junior flight attendant who had witnessed Meredith's behavior toward Jamal. "I should have said something sooner," Amanda admitted, her expression troubled. "I knew something wasn't right about how she was treating him, but I was afraid of challenging a senior crew member." "The company culture discourages that kind of intervention," Hayes acknowledged. "That's exactly what needs to change. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement about what you observed?" Amanda hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, it's the right thing to do." Meanwhile, in Boston, Jamal's helicopter touched down at a designated landing area near the convention center hosting the National Youth Science Competition. Dr. Bennett had called ahead, and several competition officials were waiting to greet him, including the MIT representatives who had expressed particular interest in his project. "Mr. Washington," the lead coordinator said, extending her hand. "We're so glad you made it. Dr. Bennett filled us in on the circumstances. We've rescheduled your presentation for tomorrow morning and arranged accommodation for you tonight." "Thank you," Jamal replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by the special treatment. "I appreciate the flexibility." "It's the least we could do," the coordinator assured him. "Your project was already among our most anticipated presentations. Now, everyone's eager to meet the young scientist at the center of today's news story." As Jamal was escorted to the hotel, his phone rang with a call from his mother. "How was the flight?" Vivian asked, her voice carrying the subtle tension of ongoing negotiations. "Smoother than the commercial one," Jamal replied with a hint of humor. "They're letting me present tomorrow morning. How are things there?" "Progressing," Vivian said diplomatically. "The airline is beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. I'll tell you more later. For now, focus on your presentation. This is your moment, Jamal. Make the most of it." "I will, Mom. And thank you for everything." "That's what mothers do," Vivian replied softly. "Especially black mothers in America." After hanging up, Vivian returned to the conference room, where Palmer and his team were reviewing the consent decree. The CEO looked up as she entered. "These terms are extraordinarily demanding," he said, tapping the document. "The financial implications of implementing all these changes would be significant, as are the financial implications of a federal civil rights investigation and the public relations damage already occurring," Vivian countered. "Your company's stock has dropped 3% since the story broke an hour ago." Palmer frowned. "You're monitoring our stock price?" "I'm thorough, Mr. Palmer. It's why I've never lost a civil rights case I've personally pursued." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Palmer exchanged glances with his legal team before responding. "We'll need modifications to some of these provisions," he said finally. "But I recognize that significant changes are necessary. Transcontinental cannot and will not tolerate discrimination." "I'm glad we agree on that fundamental point," Vivian replied. "Now let's ensure your company's practices align with that principle." As they began negotiating specific terms, Meredith Holloway was facing her own reckoning in a separate room. The airline's HR director had arrived and was reviewing her employment file with increasing concern. "Ms. Holloway, this pattern is deeply troubling," the HR director stated. "Why weren't these previous complaints brought to my attention?" Meredith shifted uncomfortably. "They were handled at the regional level. I was told they were resolved." "Resolved by dismissing legitimate concerns, it appears," the HR director replied sharply. "And now we're facing potential federal charges because of actions you took today that appear consistent with this pattern." Meredith's composure finally cracked. "I was just doing what I was trained to do. We're told to watch for suspicious behavior, and he—" "Stop," the HR director interrupted. "I've reviewed the security footage. There was nothing suspicious about that young man's behavior. What's becoming increasingly clear is that your definition of suspicious seems disproportionately applied to passengers of color." As this confrontation unfolded, Officer Thomas Miller was reviewing the airport's detention procedures with Director Pemberton and legal counsel. "Our current protocols don't adequately address situations involving minors," Miller acknowledged. "The Washington case highlights several procedural gaps that need to be addressed." Pemberton nodded grimly. Director Washington's critique was valid. "We need comprehensive revisions, not just patches to the existing system." Back in the main conference room, negotiations between Vivian and Palmer had progressed to specific implementation timelines. 3 months for the initial training rollout is insufficient, Vivian insisted. "Your entire staff needs to complete the program within 60 days, with priority given to customer-facing personnel." Palmer pushed back. "With our staffing levels and global operations, that's logistically impossible. Transcontinental managed to implement new COVID protocols for your entire global staff in under 30 days when it was a priority," Vivian pointed out. "This should be no less urgent." As she methodically dismantled each of Palmer's objections, Vivian reflected on the countless similar negotiations she had conducted throughout her career. The details changed, but the fundamental dynamic remained constant. Institutions resisted meaningful change until the cost of maintaining the status quo exceeded the cost of reform. What made this case different was not just her personal connection as Jamal's mother, but the perfect storm of circumstances. Clear evidence, social media attention, a sympathetic victim and a gifted student, and witnesses willing to speak up. Together, these factors created leverage that most discrimination victims never had. In Boston, Jamal was settling into his hotel room when he received a video call from his mother. "It's official," Vivian announced, allowing herself a small smile of victory. "Transcontinental has agreed to a comprehensive consent decree, mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff, revised complaint procedures with independent oversight, quarterly public reporting of discrimination claims, and significant policy changes for security-related passenger interactions." "That's amazing, Mom," Jamal said, genuinely impressed. "Will it really change things?" "It's a start," Vivian replied pragmatically. "Change happens incrementally, but this agreement has teeth. And because it's public rather than confidential, other airlines will likely implement similar reforms proactively to avoid being the next target." "What about Meredith?" Jamal asked. "Suspended pending investigation, though between us her employment will be terminated. The evidence is overwhelming." Jamal processed this information thoughtfully. "I don't want her to lose her job because of me, but she's losing her job because of her own actions," Vivian corrected gently. "Actions that could have had far more serious consequences for someone without our resources and connections. Think about how this might have ended for another young black man without an FBI deputy director for a mother." The sobering reality of that alternative scenario hung between them. "Now," Vivian continued, her voice softening, "tell me about your presentation tomorrow. Are you ready?" "I think so," Jamal replied, his focus shifting back to the competition. "The irony is that my project is about reducing turbulence. Today feels like I've experienced enough turbulence to last a lifetime." Vivian laughed softly. "That's how change feels. Turbulent while you're in it. Necessary when you look back on it. Get some rest, sweetheart. Tomorrow is your day to shine." After saying goodnight to his mother, Jamal reviewed his presentation one last time before turning in. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His project wasn't just about aerodynamics anymore. It was about perseverance, about rising above prejudice, about soaring despite those who would ground you. As he drifted toward sleep, Jamal reflected on the lessons of the day. His mother had always prepared him for the reality that, as a young black man in America, he would face obstacles and prejudices that others would not. Today had proven her right, but it had also validated her other teaching, that with preparation, dignity, and the courage to stand up for justice, those obstacles could be overcome. Tomorrow, he would present his project not just as a scientific achievement but as a symbol of resilience, proof that even after being forced to endure unexpected turbulence, he could still fly. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Boston Convention Center as scientists, educators, and industry representatives gathered for the final day of the National Youth Science Competition. The day's program had been slightly rearranged to accommodate Jamal Washington's delayed arrival, with his presentation now scheduled as the opening session, a prime spot that had generated significant anticipation. Behind the stage, Jamal made final adjustments to his project display, the aerodynamic wing model that had been mistaken for something sinister just one day earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very innovation that had made him a target was now poised to potentially make him a champion. 5 minutes, Mr. Washington, a competition coordinator informed him with an encouraging smile. Jamal nodded, taking a deep breath to center himself. He had presented this project dozens of times during its development, but never under circumstances like these. Overnight, his story had spread across news outlets and social media. Many in the audience would be watching not just for scientific merit, but as witnesses to his response to yesterday's injustice. In the front row, Dr. Walter Bennett sat alongside other judges, including representatives from MIT, Stanford, and NASA. Beside them was an unexpected addition, Vivian Washington, who had flown to Boston that morning after finalizing the agreement with transcontinental airlines. The moderator stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to present our first finalist of the day. His project on biomimetic applications to aerodynamic efficiency has already received exceptional preliminary scores from our judges. Please welcome Jamal Washington. The applause that greeted Jamal as he walked on stage carried an unusual intensity. Not just appreciation for scientific achievement, but a collective statement of support in light of yesterday's events. He met it with a composed smile, making eye contact with his mother before beginning. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady and clear. "My project explores how principles from owl wing structures can be applied to aircraft design to reduce turbulence and noise while improving efficiency." As he launched into his presentation, the previous day's turmoil seemed to fall away. Here, in this space dedicated to innovation and discovery, Jamal was being evaluated solely on the merit of his ideas and the quality of his work, exactly as it should be. His explanation of how owl feathers create micro-turbulence patterns that silence flight captivated the audience. The practical applications he proposed for commercial aircraft design drew impressed nods from the industry representatives. When he demonstrated his working model, showing measurable efficiency improvements of nearly 12%, audible murmurs of appreciation spread through the crowd. "In conclusion," Jamal said as he approached the end of his allotted time, "nature has already solved many of the engineering challenges we face today. By observing and adapting biological designs that have evolved over millions of years, we can create technologies that are more efficient, sustainable, and harmonious with our environment. Thank you." The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic. As Jamal fielded questions from the judges, his responses showcased not just technical knowledge, but the kind of innovative thinking that characterizes true scientific pioneers. Dr. Bennett's question came last. "Mr. Washington, your biomimetic approach is impressive. Have you considered other biological models that might offer similar benefits to different engineering challenges?" Jamal smiled, recognizing the professor's invitation to expand on his research interests. "Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in how shark skin denticles reduce drag in water and how that might apply to surface treatments for marine vessels. I'm also exploring how prairie dog burrow systems utilize natural ventilation principles that could inform more energy-efficient building designs. The breadth of his response drew appreciative nods from the judges. As Jamal concluded his presentation, Dr. Bennett caught his eye with a subtle nod of approval. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the aftermath of the previous day's events continued to unfold. Transcontinental Airlines had issued a public statement announcing comprehensive anti-discrimination initiatives and acknowledging a serious lapse in judgment regarding the treatment of Jamal Washington. Captain Richard Hayes had voluntarily come forward as a key witness, providing detailed testimony about the incident and the broader issues it represented. His 25 years of exemplary service gave his statements particular weight within the company and industry. "This isn't about one flight attendant or one incident," he told airline executives during a morning meeting. "It's about a culture that has allowed bias to influence operational decisions. When we divert a flight based on unfounded suspicions, that happened to align with racial stereotypes. We're not just harming individual passengers, we're undermining the integrity of our entire system." At Philadelphia International Airport, Director Pemberton had initiated a complete review of detention protocols, particularly those involving minors. The Washington incident had exposed significant gaps in their procedures, gaps that potentially affected thousands of travelers each year. Officer Thomas Miller, whose initial skepticism about Meredith's claims had been the first crack in the wall of institutional response, had been asked to lead a task force on reforming these procedures. His first-hand experience with the case provided valuable insight into how bias could infiltrate security operations, even when individual officers attempted to be fair. Back in Boston, as the competition continued throughout the day, Jamal found himself approached by numerous attendees, fellow students, educators, and industry representatives alike. Many expressed admiration for both his scientific work and his composure during the previous day's ordeal. A recruiter from MIT engaged him in a lengthy conversation about his future plans. "Your project demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking we value," she told him. "And frankly, the way you handled yesterday's situation shows the kind of character and resilience that's equally important." During a break between sessions, Jamal finally had a moment alone with his mother. "You were magnificent up there," Vivian said, embracing him with pride, "completely in your element." "It felt good," Jamal admitted, "to be judged on my work rather than my appearance." "That's all anyone should ask for," Vivian agreed. "Equal treatment, fair evaluation." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else you should know. The story has gone national. Several major networks covered both the incident and Transcontinental's response." Jamal absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Is that a good thing?" "I think so," Vivian replied. "Visibility creates accountability. The airline might have been willing to dismiss one complaint, but they can't ignore thousands of people watching to see if they follow through on their promises." By late afternoon, the judges had completed their evaluations, and the competitors gathered for the awards ceremony. Jamal sat among his peers, talented young scientists from across the country, each with projects representing months or years of dedicated work. Dr. Bennett approached the podium to announce the winners. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary quality of all 20 finalists this year. Each project demonstrated innovation, rigor, and potential real-world applications that impressed our entire judging panel." He paused, scanning the room. "Our third-place award goes to Emily Chen for her work on biodegradable plastics derived from agricultural waste." Applause filled the room as Emily made her way to the stage to receive her certificate and prize. "Our second-place award goes to Ryan Patel for his development of a low-cost water filtration system utilizing locally available materials in developing regions." More applause as Ryan accepted his award with a broad smile. Dr. Bennett paused, longer before the final announcement, building anticipation. "Our first-place award represents the highest achievement in this competition, a project that combines scientific innovation, practical application, and the potential for significant positive impact. This year's winner exemplifies resilience in multiple forms, not only in their scientific approach but in their personal conduct when faced with unexpected challenges." The room grew completely silent. The winner of this year's National Youth Science Competition, receiving a $50,000 scholarship and research grant, is Jamal Washington for Biomimetic Applications in Aerodynamic Efficiency, Lessons from Owl Flight Patterns. The applause that erupted was thunderous. Jamal sat momentarily stunned before rising to approach the stage. As he accepted the award from Dr. Bennett, their handshake symbolized far more than a simple academic achievement. It represented the triumph of excellence over prejudice, of substance over assumption. "Thank you," Jamal said into the microphone, his voice steady despite his emotion. "This recognition means more than I can express, especially considering the journey to get here." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Science is about observation, analysis, and drawing conclusions based on evidence rather than preconception. I hope that principle can extend beyond our laboratories and research facilities into how we interact with each other as human beings. Thank you again for this honor. The simplicity and dignity of his acceptance speech earned another round of applause as he returned to his seat, where Vivian waited with tears of pride in her eyes. 6 months later, Jamal stood before a group of middle school students at a STEM outreach event in his hometown. Now a freshman at MIT with a full scholarship, he had become an unexpected spokesperson for both scientific innovation and social justice. The wing design that won the competition started with a simple question, he told the attentive young faces before him. How does an owl fly so silently when other birds can't? That curiosity led me down a path that eventually changed not just my understanding of aerodynamics, but the trajectory of my life. He demonstrated a small model of his design, now being evaluated by several aerospace companies for potential commercial applications. Sometimes the obstacles we face become the catalyst for our greatest achievements. The discrimination I experienced became the spark for industry-wide changes in how airlines handle security concerns. Indeed, in the months following the incident, transcontinental airlines had implemented what had become known informally as the Washington Protocols, comprehensive guidelines for ensuring that security measures were applied based on objective behavior rather than subjective perceptions, potentially influenced by bias. Several other major carriers had voluntarily adopted similar measures, recognizing both the ethical and business advantages of addressing discrimination proactively. Meredith Holloway's employment had been terminated following a thorough investigation that revealed a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior. More significantly, the airline had established an independent review board for discrimination complaints, with transparent reporting mechanisms that prevented similar patterns from being ignored in the future. Captain Richard Hayes had been promoted to Director of Flight Operations, where he was instrumental in redesigning crew training to address implicit bias and encourage intervention when discriminatory behavior was observed. Amanda Peters, the junior flight attendant who had provided key testimony about Meredith's conduct, now helped lead these training sessions, sharing her experience as an example of both the harm of silence and the power of speaking up. At Philadelphia International Airport, the detention protocols developed under Officer Miller's guidance had become a model for airports nationwide, establishing clear protections for minors and requiring multiple levels of verification before security concerns could escalate to detention or flight diversions. For Vivian Washington, the incident had strengthened her division's approach to institutional discrimination cases, demonstrating how individual incidents could serve as leverage points for systemic change when properly documented and strategically addressed. As Jamal concluded his presentation to the middle school students, a young black girl raised her hand. "Weren't you angry about how you were treated? How did you stay so calm?" Jamal considered the question carefully. "I was angry," he acknowledged, "but I also understood that expressing that anger in the moment might have made the situation worse. My mother taught me that there's a time for emotion and a time for strategy. By channeling my response into systematic change rather than just individual confrontation, we accomplished something more lasting." The girl nodded thoughtfully, absorbing a lesson that went far beyond science. Later that evening, as Jamal prepared to return to MIT, he received a text message from his mother. Transcontinental Quarterly Report published today. Discrimination complaints down 78% since new protocols implemented. Real change happening. So proud of you. Jamal smiled as he boarded his flight, a transcontinental airlines flight, deliberately chosen. As he settled into his seat, the flight attendant checked his boarding pass and smiled with genuine warmth. "Mr. Washington," she said, recognition flickering in her eyes. "It's an honor to have you on board today. Your case study is now part of our mandatory training." "I'm glad something positive came from it," Jamal replied. "More than you know," she assured him. "You changed things for all of us." As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, Jamal watched the ground fall away below. The principles of aerodynamics that had fascinated him since childhood were now carrying him forward. Just as the principles of justice his mother had instilled in him had transformed a single incident of discrimination into a catalyst for lasting change. The plane banked smoothly, finding its cruising altitude above the clouds. Below, America continued its own turbulent journey toward justice, imperfect, sometimes faltering, but ultimately moving forward through the efforts of those willing to stand firm when buffeted by the headwinds of prejudice. Has this story resonated with your own experiences or observations? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe more stories highlighting both injustice and the power of standing against it need to be shared, please like, subscribe, and share this video with others who might find it meaningful. Your support helps ensure these important conversations continue. Thank you for joining me for this journey above the clouds, where we've seen how courage and dignity can transform discrimination into lasting positive change. This story illustrates powerful truths about confronting racial discrimination in America. First, preparation matters. Jamal's mother taught him how to respond to prejudice with dignity and strategic thinking rather than reactionary emotion. Second, documentation creates accountability. By recording details and gathering evidence, Jamal built an irrefutable case against injustice. The narrative demonstrates how systems often protect discriminatory behavior until powerful intervention forces change. Without Vivian's position, Jamal might have become another statistic rather than a catalyst for reform. This reality highlights the privilege disparity in justice outcomes. Perhaps most importantly, the story reveals how institutional change requires both individual courage and systemic pressure. Captain Hayes, Amanda, Dr. Bennett, and Officer Miller all represent how allies in positions of influence can help dismantle discriminatory practices from within. The transformative power of visibility also emerges as a central lesson. Public accountability through media attention and social pressure accomplished what internal complaints never could, forcing Transcontinental to implement meaningful reforms rather than cosmetic changes. Finally, the story reminds us that excellence remains the most powerful response to prejudice. By winning the competition despite adversity, Jamal demonstrated that discrimination cannot diminish true talent and determination when supported by justice and opportunity.